it could be a sign that something's on the way. On the other hand, they could use this, wait a bit longer and launch it. But we do expect that the Ukrainian armed forces will be launching some sort of major attack in the near future.
Russia has warned today that it could take the harshest possible retaliatory action in response to the drone attack on Moscow, which it has blamed on Ukraine. President Putin said the alleged attack was aimed at civilian targets and that the capital's air defences would be boosted in response.
This is, of course, a clear sign of terrorist activities. First, I want to say that the Moscow air defense system worked in the regular way, although there are things for us to work on.
Well, Ukraine has said it was not directly responsible for the attacks, which came after another night of bombing by Russian forces on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. The Ukrainian MP, Lesia Vasilyenko, spoke to Times Radio earlier and suggested the Moscow attack could even have been carried out by the Russians themselves.
Well, we had Russian false flags before. In any case, it's nothing even close to what Ukraine and Ukrainians are suffering on a daily basis. You were right in saying that this is the 17th attack this month alone. So this means that every other day, if not every day, we have air raids and we have targets hit. And mostly these are civilian targets.
Stephen Dalziel is a former senior Russian affairs analyst at the BBC World Service and joins us now. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening, Carol.
Great to have you with us. Just tell me, first of all, what do you make of this attack? Because it does appear to represent a different phase in this war, a serious series of drone attacks on an area of Moscow which is home to some of the most powerful elite in Russia.
It certainly signals something new, and unfortunately I don't have the magic answer as to what's happened. I have three possibilities behind it. One is, of course, the one that President Putin leapt to, that Ukraine officially is behind this, that presumably he means that these drones were launched from Ukraine. I find that unlikely. Perhaps we'll come back to that. But the second one is that possibly Ukraine was behind it, but they were launched from somewhere within Russia. And some of the reports suggest that even though three of them in particular seem to have been targeted at that elite southwestern area of Moscow, where a lot of the elite live, they were seen flying further north than that. So in other words, heading south towards the southwest. In other words, not from the direction of Ukraine. Now that is a possibility. It also may well be that therefore they were launched by Russians who are either anti-war or feel that the elite are not getting involved enough in the war, which is a line that Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner private limited company, in other words, his own army, that's the message he's been pushing, and he wants the elite to be more involved. Or, as your Ukrainian representative just suggested, it may well have been a false flag by the Russians themselves, which may sound absurd. Why would they fly drones over their own capital? Well, I take you back to 1999, when it's very likely that President Putin, or Prime Minister Putin as he was then, was responsible for ordering bombings of Moscow apartment blocks, giving him the excuse to start the Second Chechen War. So they have attacked their own people in the past. So any one of those three is possible. My own, if I had to be pushed to suggest which one it might be, it would be either Ukrainians or rogue Russians within Russia firing these drones.
Just on that possibility of it being a so-called false flag, something that was carried out by the Russians themselves in order to provide perhaps a pretext for further attacks, for further escalation even. I mean, it does seem to play into President Putin's narrative, which he's been sticking to throughout this war since its beginning, which is that Russia is the country that is threatened, that is under attack.
It plays into that completely. Now, some people say, well, it's unlikely because it also might suggest that Muscovites themselves are threatened and that the air defense isn't good enough. And we heard in the clip from President Putin, he said, air defense code, but things could be better. Actually, I would fall on, if it is that one, I'd fall on the idea that, yeah, it might have been done deliberately so they could say, look, yes, these drones were fired at us, but our air defence coped. Yes, of course, we didn't need to do things a little bit better, but that is entirely possible. And as I say, I'm mentioning those attacks on the apartment blocks in 1999. Putin may say that he's the great patriot and so on, but not only do we think he was responsible for killing his own people then, look at this war where some estimates say that maybe as many as 200,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in the war. This is the man who's supposed to be the patriot, who's supposed to be standing up for his people. He started this war on false pretenses, and he has no intention of giving up. And as a result, thousands upon thousands of his own countrymen are perishing.
And whoever did carry out this attack, it has brought not only further criticism from Prigozhin, this leader of the Wagner mercenary group, whose men have been fighting on the front line in Bakhmut and has been very critical of President Putin's conduct of the war. But it would also, at least, of course, remind Russian citizens of the risks and the dangers they face as a result of the conflict.
And that is possibly an important message they want to get across now, particularly to residents of Moscow and St. Petersburg, because even with the big mobilization that took place in September last year, only a tiny percentage, probably less than 1% of eligible young men in Moscow or St. Petersburg have actually been called up, because so far, and this is where actually I sounds strange to agree with something that Prigozhin has said, but I agree with him that the elite have been protected. The children of the elite, even if they're of fighting age, they're not in the front line. And this has been one of Prigozhin's criticisms. And so he may feel that now, because he will probably, I feel, be calling for another mobilization. President Putin will probably call for this if things don't improve. And this may be a way of saying, look, even you, if you live in Moscow or St. Petersburg, you've now got to go and do your bit.
What about this suggestion of Russian partisans fighting on behalf of Ukraine? I mean, we've seen those attacks that were carried out a week or so ago onto Russian territory. That was supposedly carried out by these Russian partisans, a group of military figures who are opposed to the war, opposed to President Putin, and fighting on behalf of Ukraine. I mean, is it possible that there is this growing band of figures like that who might be prepared to carry out an attack like that and who might be getting military support from Ukraine? Because, I mean, Ukraine has only said we weren't directly involved.
You're absolutely right. And it is entirely possible. One thing must be remembered, of course, is that Russia is a huge country. And even though it's a police state, there are ways that people can hide themselves away, even form groups like this. And also, yes, it's possible they got the drones from Ukraine, but it's also possible that with corruption being what it is in Moscow, they could even have bought them on the black market. It may sound absurd, but of course we know that Iran has sent thousands of its drones to Russia. It's always possible that those looking after them may have their price, and if they're offered $1 million for a drone with guarantee it wouldn't come back to them, then it's entirely possible that has happened as well. So the idea that there may be rogue groups within Russia itself who possibly support Ukraine's cause or possibly think that President Putin is not being hard enough, either of those are possible. But I think this is very, very. It is likely there are such groups. Whether they carried out this is another matter.
We've already seen the United States saying that it does not support attacks on Russian territory, and the US and other Western governments who've been providing military equipment and weapons to Ukraine have been insistent that they should be used to defend Ukraine's territory. Do you think there is a risk here that this attack could perhaps fray the Western support, which has been pretty unified for Ukraine until now?
I don't think it will, because it's not certain that it was the Ukrainians who were behind it. I think there'll be a lot of questions. I'm sure there's a lot of conversations going on with the Ukrainians behind the scenes. But it was very interesting that Ben Wallace, of course, the British Defence Minister, came out today and said Ukraine has every right to push back, and if it means attacking targets within Russia, as long as they're not doing it with the equipment we're sending them, then that's all. That's virtually. I paraphrase, but he basically said that's fair game because they have been attacked unjustifiably. They've been attacked by Russia, and therefore they are justified in carrying out such measures. So it's interesting. I thought that was very interesting, that comment from Ben Wallace. It suggests that there is still a lot of support from the West for Ukraine.
And what about the suggestion, and we're going to hear more on this in a moment, from Fabrice Potier, who's a former NATO senior official, saying that this could be perhaps the start of Ukraine's new offensive, new fight back?
It could well be. I mean, particularly as it may be a distraction from where the main attack the main counterattack is going to come from. They are already talking in Kyiv that this counteroffensive is ready to go. This, of course, is a huge distraction, and Moscow must be thinking now about its air defense. The Kremlin must be thinking about the air defense in Moscow. So it could be a sign that something's on the way. On the other hand, they could use this, wait a bit longer and launch it. But we do expect that the Ukrainian armed forces will be launching some sort of major attack in the near future.
Stephen Dalziel, former senior Russian affairs analyst at the BBC World Service. Really good to have your insight. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carol.